Hello, Magic is Real listeners. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Shannon. I'm your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about near death experiences and all types of other spiritually transformative experiences. Today, I am very honored and happy to have with me Jan Holden. And Jan and I have just returned from the Near Death Experience Conference, which is why there has been a little bit of a lull in between episodes. It took up a big week. It was a beautiful event. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Jan, and then we'll say hello to her and have her tell her story and share her insights. Jan Miner Holden is a near-death experience and transpersonal pioneer researcher. She earned her Doctor of Education degree in counselor education in 1988 and served 31 years on the University of North Texas Counseling Program faculty, 12 of those years as chair of the Department of Counseling and Higher Education. Dr. Holden's primary research focus has been near-death experiences, after-death communication, and other transpersonal experiences. She served as the lead editor of the 2009 Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, 30 Years of Investigation, and she co-edited the Association for Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values in Counseling's 2017 Connecting Soul, Spirit, Mind, and Body, a collection of spiritual and religious perspectives and practices in counseling. Jan, thank you so much for being here with me today. It's so good to see you.
It's wonderful to be here, Shannon. Thank you for the invitation.
I'm so happy to have you. Well, I would like to start by learning about you, the person, and not just the researcher. I would love to know what it was that drew you to this work in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in topics like what I now refer to as transpersonal. I remember reading books about this even as a preteen uh, young person, and I remember reading about mysticism in high school, and then when I was a sophomore in college, my father had read a book called The Great Soul Trial. And it's a true story of a reclusive miner from Arizona who disappeared and left several $100,000 for research on the survival of the human soul after death. And this was back in the 60s. And the state of Arizona had to put on um, a trial to hear everybody who had petitioned to be the recipient of that will of the proceeds from the will. So this book, The Great Soul Trial, is mostly the testimony of people like the president of the American Society for Psychical Research and the research director of the Psychical Research Foundation, talking about how they would do research on this question. And there's a whole interesting story about that would take 20 minutes to tell. But for me, looking back in my life, I consider that book, The Great Soul Trial, to have been the single most significant book of my life because it opened my mind to the possibility of researching questions like this. So now that was in around 1970. So fast forward to I had become a high school psychology teacher, had pursued my master's and was finishing my doctorate in counselor education and had to write a dissertation. So long story short, I started and got aborted 5 different research studies. Like I would start one and then something would go wrong. And so then I'd start another one and something would go wrong. And finally, the one that went all the way through to the end was one related to near-death experiences. And, a lot of people, after they write a doctoral dissertation, they don't want to see the topic again. They're just sick of it. But I was just the opposite. I was absolutely enthralled and proceeded for the next many years, continuing to this day to do research on that phenomenon and everything related. Because as you indicated in your introduction, in near-death experiences, all these other experiences also occur that can occur outside of NDEs, like after death communication with deceased loved ones, mystical experiences of communion with divine entities, precognition of the future, memories of past lives. So all of that has been the domain of my research, but really focusing primarily on near-death experiences, NDEs, and after-death communication, ADCs.
Very succinctly and well explained.
Good.
I would love to know, too, from the beginning of your research back in the 70s to now. I'm trying to think of how to ask this specifically, but what has changed about your initial perceptions of what is going on the other side? Or what have you learned that maybe today you've had even more revelations about, oh my gosh, this actually wasn't what I thought? Or anything you want to share about how has the knowledge that you've acquired sort of evolved and changed, and where are you now? As opposed to, I know it's a very broad question, so really you can answer that any way you want, but this is a lot of years of research. So I'd love to know sort of what has been like your biggest takeaway as you continue to learn.
Mhm. Well, interestingly, one of the things I say when I do like an NDE 101 lecture is I talk about Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, that in 1975, that in which the term near-death experience, he coined that term in that book. And that book is really credited with opening the contemporary field of near-death studies, even though we know, even as he said in that book, that these experiences have been occurring throughout history and across culture. And so when I lecture, I start with that, and then I say, so here's a little spoiler alert that just about everything I'm going to tell you that has been confirmed through research over the last now almost 50 years is essentially what he said in that book. Almost everything that he presented has just been confirmed. So I don't know that I have been surprised or that my perspective has changed. I would say that it's just that research has deepened, but still consistent with some of my initial impressions about near-death experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think I've been studying informally this topic for many years, deep diving into it, and now it's just becoming more clear. As you said, I'm having more of these things validated. So it's starting to all come together. And I think that's essentially what you're saying is you just keep finding more and more evidence to back up what you already believed. And
Mhm.
one of the most profound moments I had recently was interviewing Vinnie Tolman,
Oh, yeah.
who, because he was dead for 45 minutes, I think he went deeper than most. And
Mhm.
everything he said was like, it's all coming together, it's all validated. I had such a profound a mind blown experience of everything he's saying is backing up what you all are telling me, all of the people that are involved in this community. It's all coming together. And in a way, it's interesting. I had a client yesterday who said, what is my dad doing on the other side? And I said, well, he's not telling me specifically, but I'll tell you what I'm learning is that it's kind of like the movie Defending Your Life with, was it Albert Brooks?
Yeah.
And Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep. It feels more institutional than we would think. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Specifically, what I mean by that is we think of quote unquote heaven, the other side, as this magical place, which it is. But I'm understanding too that there are these sort of classes that we take and these councils and these, it almost feels like a board of education, that there are actually these roles and these Akashic records. And it feels a lot more institutional than I think we were led to believe through
Mhm.
spiritual
Yeah.
documents. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I can't say that I have expertise on that exact thing because, my focus has been more on the experiences themselves and what they mean for the living people's lives. But I do have many of the impressions that you've mentioned that there's purpose in afterlife activity, and it's uh, and at the same time it remains quite mysterious,
Right.
because its existence at another energetic level where the laws of operation are very different than the laws here. So but absolutely, I have the impression that there's purpose and planfulness, and also a great deal of enjoyment and celebration and praise. So yeah, so all of that seems is fits my impression as well.
Yeah. And this is another, these are such broad questions, but after having done all this research, what is this all about? What are we all doing? Why are we coming into these bodies? Um, what have you gathered about what it is that we're doing here? Why we experience the things we do? Why it's all temporary? Do we choose it? Of soul contracts? Anything you'd like to share? It's again broad, so take it wherever you want to take it.
Mhm. Well, my impression from near-death experiencers, many of them come back with a very consistent message that our lives here on Earth have purpose, that we're here to advance in our capacity to love, that we are really all already part of God, and also something developing and evolving. So we're all essentially worthwhile at the same time that we're still also developing spiritually, and we're here to love and also to learn, to advance in knowledge, that somehow when we acquire knowledge, it's somehow beneficial at higher levels. I don't understand that, but that's the impression I have. And for me, what that that message really makes sense about, especially about advancing in our capacity to love. And I think often that if everyone on earth operated with that intention to advance in their capacity to love at every level, not only in terms of moment to moment interactions with other people, but when we're making decisions at organizational, governmental, and global levels. If we were guided by love, which I define as commitment to the greatest well-being of. And so I love others, I love myself, and if and love the planet and all of that. So if that's always my motive, what a different world we would live in than the one we live in now, with the degree of suffering and um, absence of love that we see in a lot of activities. Yeah.
Absolutely. And before I had you come on, before we started, I asked you if there was something that we could focus on because it's such a broad subject. We could go on all day about it. And you had mentioned something that I found interesting, especially as an evidential psychic medium, about I don't know if it's a phenomenon or just but of people crossing their souls leaving their body, crossing over, and coming back with sort of evidence, and I'm now the word is escaping me, so
Veridical.
veridical. I knew
Hmm.
it was I was like, "It's not vestibular, it's
Yeah.
veridical." So
Correct.
let's talk about veridical near-death experiences and what that's all about.
Okay. Well, connected to what I just said, I think if people are going to take the message of near-death experiences seriously, they need to believe that near-death experiences have some validity, that they're more than just a personal subjective experience, that they really represent in some way, some level of objective reality. And so being able to essentially prove that when a person perceived that they were outside of their body, viewing the material world, that they really were, it that is where veridical perception comes in. So in veridical perception, a person perceives things, and it could be in the material world or the transmaterial world. And I'll give an example of that later because it's easier to imagine in the material world. Um, they perceive something that, based on the condition and position of their physical body, they should not have been able to know. And yet, when they recover and report their NDE, report what they perceived is shown to be accurate. And those perceptions are especially convincing when they, as I said, are outside of what would have been available to them physically, or even in terms of being able to kind of deduce or that something would happen. So especially if it's something that either was totally unexpected or actually contradicted their expectations, and then was verified by a credible third party. And so actually, so back in uh, 20, 2009, we published a book, The Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, and I wrote a chapter on veridical perception in that handbook. And at the time, we had actually, we meaning near-death researchers, had tried a half dozen times to conduct hospital studies using a visual target that was post mounted in a room where cardiac arrest would be likely to occur in a hospital, but up above eye level facing the ceiling, because most near-death experiencers report their consciousness is located up at or just above the ceiling, looking through the ceiling. And what we hoped would happen is that somebody would go into cardiac arrest. They would have a near-death experience while up at the ceiling. While watching the resuscitation and all that stuff, they also would see this thing, that maybe a red card with a triangle in the middle and the number 3 on each corner, and then come back and report what they saw. Then we would be able to go there and see if indeed that is what was on the particular card that was in the particular room where they were. And of course, the cards would be different in different rooms and so forth. And to make a long story short, different researchers have tried this in different ways, and none of us have actually captured a case of where a person reports the visual target that was mounted. And so we're still exploring, how to accomplish that. But in the meantime, I had collected over 100 cases from the professional literature in which veridical perception had occurred. And I categorized them by their evidential level, and also by whether they were perceptions of the material world or the transmaterial. Now, an example from the material world is like Trisha Barker. She was a college student, terrible car accident, broke her back in a few places, and was told that she would never walk again. And that night, then, of course, went into surgery. During the surgery, she flatlined. And a lot of interesting things happened that I won't go into here. I'll cut to the veridical part. At some point, she decided to leave the operating room, that is her consciousness, and she thought of her mother, and then boom, she was in the waiting area or the waiting room, and saw her mother literally on her knees praying, and could hear what her mother was praying, even though her mother was praying silently. And then thought, oh, I wonder where my stepfather is. He's not here. And boom, she goes to another part of the hospital and she sees him putting coins into a candy machine and bending out a candy bar. And she's totally shocked by this because her parents are like strict vegan and they don't eat processed sugar. And here her stepfather is vending out a candy bar. So after, of course, they resuscitated her, completed the surgery. She regains consciousness. Only her mother is there with her at this time, and she tells her mother what she saw, her mother's prayers and so forth. And the mother's absolutely taken aback. And then she said she had enough presence of mind, even though she'd just come out of anesthetic, to say to her mother, well, where was my stepfather? And she said, well, he was so upset about, and so anxious about your surgery and everything. He just had to go walk in the hospital. And she said, and oh, Trisha, you'll never believe this. When he came back, he was eating a candy bar. And Trisha's like, I believe it because I actually saw that. So that's an example of veridical perception of the material world. And then there are cases where people in their NDEs met deceased loved ones who were not known to have died. As far as they and everybody they knew this person was still alive, but they met them as a deceased spirit, so to speak, in their near-death experience. And then when they again were stabilized, regained consciousness, and reported this, and everybody was like, no, Aunt Mary's fine. And then they get the telephone call that Aunt Mary died, late last night before this person's NDE. So that's veridical perception in the transmaterial world, where they're not viewing this material world, but things at the, quote unquote, spiritual level. And so, as I said, I found like over 100 cases, and that became the core for a book that's now published, actually in its second edition, called The Self Does Not Die. And it in that book contains over 125, I believe, cases of it includes many of the ones I had, but many more than I had as well, that have been investigated and are in most cases verified by the physician who was attending a person during a medical crisis. So they're just so like, I'll just tell you one more of my favorites from the book. This woman is in surgery. She unexpectedly flatlines. She's up at the ceiling looking down, but she's actually above the ceiling, looking through and seeing and looking through walls and that all around. And then they resuscitate her, finish the surgery. The whole time, of course, she's completely anesthetized. And so they take her to post-op. She regains consciousness. Her surgeon comes to check on her, and she says, I know that I died during the surgery. And he's like, what? And she said, yeah, I was up above the ceiling looking down through it, and I could see you did this and this person did that, and somebody rushed into the room with this, and it was completely accurate. But the part that was really catching is they said, and I could see into the adjacent operating rooms. And next door was they were amputating a man's leg. And when they finished, they put the leg into a yellow plastic bag to dispose of it. Now, the surgeon said, I have no idea what's going on in the other operating rooms, when I'm doing surgery. But at this time, it was now a couple of hours later. She was in post-op, she'd regained consciousness and was stabilized, and he came to visit her. It was a couple hours later. So he went back to the hospital records and found that, in fact, while he was doing the surgery on her, next door, they were amputating a man's leg. And now that room was empty. And he'd never been in it because it was specialized for amputations, which he didn't do. But because it was empty, he went to the room and poked his head inside, and there he saw the yellow plastic bags that they used to dispose of amputated body parts. So in this case, the patient knew something that even the surgeon didn't know, but was able to verify through hospital records. So those are the kinds of cases that really substantiate that when the person says they absolutely, it feels absolutely real, and they won't even say it feels real. They say it was real, that I was really out of my body watching what was happening, and that it isn't just a subjective experience. It seems to be objectively accurate. What the research on these cases indicates is that it's very rare for people to make errors in their perceptions. I mean, they do sometimes, but in most cases, what they report corresponds perfectly to what the living people in the area, remember happening. And that there's this thing in near-death research, or in research in general, called the file drawer effect. And that's the possibility that when a researcher comes across a case where there was error, somebody said that they saw this, but something completely different happened, they just kind of write it off and, put it in the file drawer and don't publish it. But a statistician looked at all the cases that I had found and figured out that it would have taken a few thousand cases of error to make the cases I had found statistically non-significant. And maybe and many of the people who have reported these cases were doing research on this subject, so their intention was to report whatever they found. So if they had found a lot of error, they presumably would have published it. And so and even knowing this information has been out there, if people had uh, experienced or observed perceptions that involved a lot of error, they could have come forward, and people just haven't. They just seem to be very, by and large, extremely accurate.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And also, Trisha is a good friend of mine. And I'm
Oh,
not just saying this because she's my friend. I'm saying this because I read her book before we were friends, and it's one of the best written. She's a writer. It's
yeah,
called Angels in the OR, and it's a wonderful book. Even if you're not, even apart from the near death experience story, there's some beautiful healing messages in there, but it's also compelling and well written. So I just wanted to recommend it, not because she's my friend, but because I genuinely
yeah,
really, really enjoyed it.
yeah.
And there's also, I remember a story about a woman leaving her body in the operating room and then reporting back that she saw a shoe on top of the hospital roof. I know you know this one because it's an
Right.
oldie but a goodie. And I
Yeah.
felt like it was a blue shoe, but maybe it was a red shoe. I don't know, but it was and sure enough they found out that there was somehow a shoe. I don't know how it got there, but on
Mm,
top of the roof that no one knew, but she was
mm,
able to see it. So I think that is just yeah, I think some people, as you said, there are some instances where someone has an experience that's not like the others, or they don't, or they do see something that wasn't there. And I don't know. I wonder, maybe some of them aren't having true NDEs, they're having hallucinations. Maybe they didn't really die, they're having a seizure. But I also don't discount all of the stories just because they conflict. But in cases of, oh, I saw, my mother coming off a plane and she wasn't, who knows? I mean, maybe I know my sister actually died on the table during a surgery and she has no recollection, just nothing happened.
yeah.
So my only thought is she just wasn't supposed to die.
Mhm.
Her heart stopped, but I don't think her soul was meant to leave the body, and so it just didn't happen. But again, these are all just theories.
Exactly. Yeah. All we can do is speculate. And because research certainly has not, as you're kind of alluding to, that of all the people who survive a close brush with death, about 80 to 90% of people don't report remembering anything
Yeah.
unusual, whereas about 10 to 20% report a near-death experience. We've researched these two groups of people. We can't find any significant differences between them. And then even beyond that, among the people who had the near-death experiences, as far as we can tell, and this is, we're not sure about the exact numbers, but it seems like about 90% of cases of near-death experiences are predominantly pleasurable,
Yeah.
whereas about 10% are dominated by distressing feelings like terror, horror, isolation, things like that. And we've studied the people in those two groups and also can't find a difference between them. So what I like to say is heaven only knows
Mhm.
why some people have NDEs, why some have pleasurable and others distressing. We can speculate, like you said, but I think this is one of those things. This is going to be high on my question list when my time comes to pass to the other side.
Mine too, mine too.
Yeah.
I don't wanna negate anyone's experience, it's just I wonder why. Some people say, "I went to hell," and some people say, "There is no such thing as hell," and,
Mhm.
maybe they had a hellish experience for a reason, I don't know, but it's very interesting, and again, we won't know till we get there.
Yeah.
But I would love also to know, when I was at the conference and there were all of us there together, I felt the most spiritual energy I've ever felt,
Yeah.
and suddenly I was hearing spirit loudly, I was feeling spirit loudly because we were all among people who have this open energy, whose souls have left and come back, or even just people who, like me, are just open to it. And ever
Yeah.
since I got back, and I'm getting chills now, my abilities have been on fire. So I wanted to know, with you, because you have been so open to this research, do you also find yourself having a lot of, I mean, no, it's been forever, but
Mhm.
a lot of spiritual experiences, intuitive hits? You may not identify as a medium or whatever, but because you're so aware of what's happening, do you find that that has affected your life and the way that you go through the world, and increased your sensitivity or spiritual experiences?
Yeah. Well, of course, I can't know if studying this stuff has increased my abilities because I didn't go through a life without researching that and see whether I have the same kind of abilities. But I have had a lot of transpersonal experiences. And let me just, I'm going to come back to that, but let me just say a word about this. Um, I prefer the word transpersonal, meaning experiences that in some way transcend the usual personal limits of space, time, identity, or influence. And the reason I prefer that word to like spiritually transformative experience, because not everybody who has experiences in this domain considers them spiritual. And I've even known a couple people who really resented having the word spiritual laid on an experience that they didn't subjectively perceive that way. So, transpersonal experiences include those that people consider spiritual and those that people don't. But in all cases, there is this transcendence of the usual personal limits of space, time, identity, or influence. So that's why I use that word. So I've had a lot of them, including mediumistic. I mean, I had an experience. When I was learning the counseling technique of induced after death communication. So this is a grief, a treatment for grief, in which a person processes the core sadness in their grief, at the end of which many people spontaneously have an after death communication with the person that they're grieving. So when I was learning the counseling technique of how to facilitate these kinds of experiences, we were here, and this is my home office, and we is me and three of my students who I'd brought to Chicago with me, and the four of us learned the technique together from Al Botkin, who developed it, and then came back here to the Dallas area, and we met here, I think once a week for a couple of months and practiced on each other. So one day, we were sitting, actually, I can tell you two stories if we have time, but
We
the
do. Yeah.
the one about my mediumistic experiences, it was my turn to be the client, and my student Jenny was my counselor, my guide, and and I, because we'd been doing this a lot, I was getting really low on my list of dead people that I wanted to contact. But I thought of my cousin David, and he had died after coming back from the Vietnam War. So this had been like 20 or more years before we were doing this. And so we start the process. I close my eyes, and there is David. And he died very traumatically, but in my mind's eye, he was whole and healthy. And what often happens in my after-death communications with loved ones is that we don't say anything, we don't telepathically do anything. There's just this look of love that passes between us that is, and I'm getting chills as I'm saying this, it's just conveys absolute, eternal, unconditional love, and it just an eternal connection. So he and I were just looking at each other this way for about, maybe, I'm going to say, like 45 seconds, when suddenly his father, my Uncle Ray, who I hadn't really even thought about because I was never close to Ray, or his wife Norma, my aunt. They were great people, but just never, for some reason, were close. But Ray literally elbowed his way in front of David. He held out his hand, and there was an hourglass in his hand. And so it was clear glass, meant to sit on a table, hourglass shaped, but no sand inside. And so I knew immediately, again, there's no explicit message. I just knew that he wanted me to contact my Aunt Norma, who was still alive physically, and tell her that I had seen him, and that this would have meaning for her. So I open my eyes, I tell Jenny what I've seen. I haven't talked to Norma in, decades. And when I did know her, as I said, we were never close. I remember being at their house once, and we were down in the basement for a Christmas party. But anyway, and I said to Jenny, I have the sense that Ray wants me to call her, and like, I'm going to call her and say, hi, Aunt Norma, how are you? I saw Ray, and he wanted me to tell you an hourglass, like, right. So I said, well, what I'll do is write her a letter. And that way she'll be able to, and I'll start by saying, if anything here bothers you, you can. And so Jenny, in her wisdom, said, well, let's, check in and see how that flies. So we do the technique. I close my eyes, and there's Ray. He's still got the hourglass in this hand, and he's got a telephone receiver in this hand. Like, call her. So, much longer story, much shorter. I eventually did, and told her the story of all this. And I ended by saying, I have no idea, what this means. And she said, I know exactly what it means. I'm like, you do? She said, yeah. She said, I'm looking at them right now. And I said, them? And she said, yeah. She said, when I was little, we'd go visit my grandmother, and it was so boring. This was in the days before television and, blah. So, but my grandmother had these two cut crystal vases that she kept on an end table that had a glass shelf. So I would lay on the floor, scoot under the glass shelf, and watch the sun glint through these beautiful crystal vases. And she said I could entertain myself for 20, 30 minutes that way. So when my grandmother died, that's all I wanted from her estate was these two vases. They're sitting on my dining room table right now. I'm looking at them. And she said, the thing is, They're both clear glass, sitting on a table, but they're different shapes, the two, but they're both wide at the top, then they get narrow, they're wide at the bottom. Of course, there's no sand in them. She said, nothing you could have told me would convince me more that Ray is waiting for me.
Wow. Wait, I have a
Yeah,
question. She's on the other side now, right?
yeah, she is. Yeah.
Because it's so funny because she's with us now, and I know that because when I got on the phone with you, I was hearing Norma Jean in my head, and I was like, "Is it Norma
Oh,
Jean?" Because I said if Spirit wants to come through at any point, and I heard Norma, but I didn't say anything because I was like, maybe later I'll say it to you after the interview. And I don't know if her name was Norma Jean like Marilyn, but I heard Norma Jean, so I
uh,
think that was just her way of letting me know she was present, and I was going to run that by you, but now you've just confirmed it, so we don't have to confirm it. But I just think that's the coolest.
that is
Um,
wonderful.
I
That's
heard
wonderful.
Norma, and I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I'll ask her about that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear your other story because I love anecdotal
Hmm.
experiences of just knowing that we are able to connect with the unseen world. It's so
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Yeah. Well, the other story is also in here when we were practicing. And this time I was the counselor and Jenny was the client. And Jenny was, her sister had died tragically in an accident like 10 years before. And she'd never had a sense of connection with her sister before. So we did the IADC thing, and she had a profound experience of connection with her sister, and it was all great. Well, I'm going to show you actually literally what happened. So I was sitting, um, I'll move a little bit.
Yeah.
I was sitting here and she was sitting here facing this way. So you can see that the door is right behind her. So when we were finishing and kind of processing and all that, she said, I feel as if a door has opened in my relationship with my sister, like a new door has opened. And then she said something else that maybe like 10 seconds later, as she's sitting here, this door just popped open and slowly opened. A door opened just
Wow.
like that. I was, my jaw dropped. My other two students were sitting on this couch. They could see it and their jaws were dropped. And Jenny's like, what? And we pointed and she turned around to see the door opening gradually. Now, I've lived in this house now for more than 25 years. Never has the door spontaneously opened, ever. And of course, the first thing I did was look to see if like my husband had done that or something. I mean, he'd never interrupt my counseling type sessions. But of course, he was nowhere to be found. The door just opened on its own. And here's another interesting thing. Um, so fast forward another 15 years or so, and I'm doing a study at the University of North Texas comparing IADC, induced after death communication, with traditional grief counseling to see what if there's any difference in the effectiveness of helping people with their grief. And in a nutshell, IADC is substantially more helpful to people than traditional grief counseling, but that's not the story I want to tell you. We were doing the study at the university counseling clinic on a Saturday, and we were at the very end of the study. It was the one of the very last sessions, and this particular day, all that was left was the client and counselor in the counseling room, and me waiting for them to finish so I could take the client to the computer so she could answer the questions about grief. So I'm standing in what we call the control room, looking, you can see each counseling room. It was, as I said, the only people in the whole clinic were the three of us. And as I was standing there and they were just beginning to wrap up, I heard this click and I looked behind me and the door to the control room had popped open and was gradually opening. And that door is on a lever, um, handle. So like, how did that happen? And but it said to me that that with this study, a door is opening into something new, related to the use of this technique. So, which has yet to manifest. But we just got the article of that study published. So maybe more is going to happen now.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I can understand how it would be difficult to intentionally recreate to do studies of recreating NDEs. I'm currently watching the show The OA. Have you watched it? On
Mm,
Netflix, and it is, similar to Flatliners, the movie with Julia Roberts and Kiefer Sutherland,
yeah.
but it's wonderful. It's on Netflix. It's,
It's called
oh,
The Way.
VOA,
Oh,
just
TOA.
the OA, and it's written, by Britt Marling and created by Britt Marling, and, it's about NDE, some sort of a mad scientist who takes all of these NDE people and has them in a it's a sci-fi, sort of has an ex machina feeling to it, and he's doing studies on them over
Yeah.
and over by killing them and bringing them back to life. But it's the only way to do that, right, is to induce death, which you can't do ethically or but that's why it's such interesting work too, is you have to get the person after they happen to have already died and come back. And you
Yeah.
could leave the cards in the room, but perhaps their attention won't be drawn, waiting for someone to die and come back. How long is that going to take? And also, is that what their focus is going to be on if it doesn't hold personal significance to them?
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's
Right.
a lot in there, but I'm so happy that people are exploring this, understanding this, and people like
Mm-hmm.
Eben Alexander, who is a neuroscientist who wasn't open to this until it happened to him. I just think it's interesting to hear and see more researchers, doctors exploring this and realizing that this isn't, as you said, necessarily spiritual. It just is. What I say is it's not paranormal or supernatural, it's normal and natural. We've given it this different meaning, but as you said, it's transpersonal. It's something that we're not used to seeing, but actually it's part of physics. It's part of the way the universe works. It just seems wild. Same with extraterrestrials and crafts in different dimensions. It feels so sci-fi, but really it's just science.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That it's just that we can't always quantify it or see
Right.
it with the
Right.
naked eye. But,
Yeah.
and not everyone believes that, that's okay, but I know that I now believe it 110%, and,
Mm-hmm.
it's exciting too. Like, I did a reading this week where I said, I doubted this information, but I was looking at her and I said, "Your dad's talking about, did somebody get shot in the leg and the bullet's still in there?" And I'm thinking, "There's no way." I don't know what. She goes, "Yeah, it happened to my brother. He got shot. He has a part of a bullet in his leg." I'm like, "How would I know that?" If
Really.
our father was not relaying that information to me, that is her. I mean, her brother wasn't in the war. It was like some freak weird thing. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how they show us that
Mm-hmm.
I know, like, what's happening. And I said, "Your father just said something about you getting a new toothbrush." And she said, "Yes, I literally was just brushing my teeth." And she said some more stuff. She was like, and I was thinking, I have to get a new toothbrush. And I'm like, he literally just told me that because he wants you to know he can hear your thoughts. He can hear what you're thinking. They're not spying on us,
No.
but they
No.
are ever aware. They can tap into your energy and have an awareness of all these, just these little things happening in your life. And they often show me, your washer and dryer's broken, there's a leak in the ceiling, just to let me know, and that they
Mm-hmm.
are with you. They see you and they're not judging any of it. They're just observing. And
Yeah,
so,
and
yeah.
a word that I often use is that they remain interested. They're interested. They care about, and that's why they're knowledgeable and paying attention to these things. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Jan, thank you so much for joining me today and for doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
I know it's a passion of yours, but it's also really helpful to the collective
Mm,
in opening people's minds because people want to see. I'm the same way, I'm logical. I need to see proof of it.
yeah.
Um, I even studied mediumship to prove to myself it was real and that it
Mm,
wasn't just magical thinking. And that's how I
mm,
became a medium as I went, this is real. This is real. This is happening.
mm,
And now it's the biggest passion, but it's really opening up a lot, and people are starting to embrace it more. And It's okay if they're not there yet, but it is really interesting, and I love hearing it from people that are so grounded and educated, so that hopefully people can listen to your message and not think, "Oh, that lady's a kook." It's like, "Listen,
Mhm.
this woman's really smart and grounded, and this is the research that we're doing." So, is
Yeah.
there anything else you wanna share just in summation, either about what's happening with you or services or books that you're working on, or even just final thoughts from Jan?
Mhm. A couple things. One is that I just want to make sure that your listeners are aware of the website of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, where they
Yes.
can find a lot of information about NDEs and related phenomena. And the other thing is about facilitating near-death experiences. I recently, about a year and a half ago, did three ketamine-assisted
Mhm.
therapy sessions just for personal growth,
Yeah.
curiosity sort of thing. And had an experience that scored 9 on the NDE scale. And if something scores 7 or higher, it's considered a near-death experience. And the reason I even got into doing that was because someone had contacted me who had an NDE during his ketamine session that actually scored like 23 on the scale. It was really high. And so we're actually doing a study right now. Anybody who goes to seeks ketamine assisted therapy in this practice, who is deemed appropriate, by the therapist, is invited to participate in the study where we're just asking about whether they had any kind of experience that was like a near death experience. So the study is happening in Austin, Texas. So that's not available to a lot of people easily, but people even fly in from out of town to do sessions with this therapist. Her name is Julie. And so if anybody among your listeners has been thinking about doing ketamine assisted therapy, they can contact me and find out if they would want to go through this with her. And it's kind of like the Wild West out there with ketamine and psychedelic psychotherapy in general right now. There's really good, careful research being done, but once we get into the clinical application, there aren't standards and things like that. So there are all kinds of things being done. Julie is absolutely, in my opinion, the very best. She really knows how to do this therapy in a way that has the most potential benefit to the person. And so anyway, those were a couple of
Great.
my final thoughts.
Oh, thank you. I love that. I'm really interested in that. And before I die, I personally would like to do an ayahuasca journey in safe, in safe environment with safe people, in a structured environment where I know that there's access to hospitals and things like that. But
Absolutely.
just
That's
it's a curiosity that I have that isn't necessary. And I personally don't suffer from depression. I have tried the ketamine, but not for partying, but, like, for a spiritual experience but it was it's easily attainable and through a doctor so I didn't have that, but I know that there is a lot happening around that I'm starting to really delve into, in terms of psychedelic experiences, and again, disclaimer, if you have schizophrenia, bipolar in your family, please don't do that. Please don't do that or speak to a
yeah,
doctor, because psychosis can follow if you have mental illness in your family. You do not want to be messing around with any of this. In fact,
yeah.
don't mess around with any of it, ideally, and without supervision. But that's just my disclaimer that I always say because I've lost a friend to psychosis because of this kind of thing. But otherwise, it can be a really interesting way to explore if you're doing it from a place of not escaping your reality and um, literally curiosity and spiritual enlightenment. Just be safe, please. That's all I say.
Exactly right.
But yeah.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
thank you so much, Jan Holden, for being here
Okay.
with me. It's so good to see you
Thanks.
and look forward to seeing more from you.
All right. Wonderful. Take care.
You too.